Our next witness, as we're going in the order of seniority, is Representative Pramila Jayapal. Congressman Jayapal represents the 7th Congressional District of Washington. I believe it's the city of Seattle. A lot of coffee, and a big tower, and boats, and salmon. Currently serving in her 3rd term. She's the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and also chairs the Immigration Task Force of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus and has been a dynamic leader in this particular Congress especially. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Cohen, Ann Nadler, Ranking Members Johnson and Jordan, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at this important hearing with my wonderful colleagues. I sit before you as the first and only South Asian American woman elected to the House of Representatives. 9/11 forever changed what it means to be Muslim, Arab, or South Asian American in America. On September 11th, a friend on the East Coast woke me up at 5 in the morning, calling to ask if I had heard what had happened. I had just moved into a new home. I had to unpack my very tiny television, and I sat amidst boxes, watching in horror as the first images of the Twin Towers played on repeat. And I knew that life would never be the same again for people who look like us sitting at this table. In the days and weeks after, I received fearful calls from individuals in the Sikh, Muslim, and Arab American community who were being attacked for wearing turbans or hijabs. I heard from moms and dads who were afraid to send their kids to school, a fear that I shared for my own child. For the first time since I had come to America at the age of 16, I had to think about whether to wear my Indian clothes outside, and I didn't want to let my child leave the house. When I left home, I literally could feel the tension in my body, like I was being constantly watched, and I worried that I would be attacked or that someone would yell hateful things at me simply for being who I am. Others had it far, far worse. On September 13th, a man armed with a gun and a tank of gasoline went to a mosque in North Seattle, trying to attack people as they left evening prayers and setting a car on fire. A few days later, the first Sikh American, Balbir Singh Sodhi, was murdered in Mesa, Arizona, simply because his attacker thought that he looked like Osama bin Laden and should be held responsible for the attacks. Every single day I received calls about Muslim women who had been harassed on the streets, women having their hijabs torn off, taxi drivers who were beaten for being Sikh American, Muslim families who withdrew their children from school because they were too afraid to get on the bus or go out in public. And it didn't help when days after the attacks, President George W. Bush proclaimed, "Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists." For many Arab, Muslim, and South Asian communities, this stark language seemed directed at us, and the words cemented division and had an enormous psychological impact on our communities. This us versus them rhetoric sparked terrible policy decisions that continue to impact the civil rights and civil liberties of Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities, as well as other communities. Cloaked in national security, the President and Congress advanced policies and laws intentionally designed to criminalize, surveil, police, and deny immigration benefits to these communities. Just 10 days after 9/11, Congress passed the Patriot Act, with little regard for the enormous problems that it created for civil liberties and privacy protections for all Americans, but in particular for those most likely to be targeted. Many provisions which still remain and have been used against Masa communities. There are some beautiful things that come out of crisis as well. I ended up founding a nonprofit civil rights organization named One America to fight the backlash targeting Muslim, Sikh, and South Asian communities, and ended up organizing immigrants across the board for justice for the next decades. In the months and years that followed, we successfully defeated government efforts to deport about 5,000 Somalis from across the country. We fought back against special registration and detention of 1,200 Arab and Muslim men. We defended Muslim and Somali businesses from unjust attempts by the government to put them out of business. We held hearings to tell our stories, including a 2003 Senate hearing held at the request of late Senator Ted Kennedy. I am proud that out of tremendous crisis came courage and resilience of our communities, but I am also aware of how much work there is still to do. I still have constituents who are trying to get their names off discriminatory lists created after 9/11 that have prevented them from getting benefits that they should have. 20 years later, here in Congress, I was proud to introduce a resolution on the anniversary of 9/11 with my colleagues, Representatives Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Judy Chu. Our resolution, HRES 629, recognizes the climate of hate that Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern, South Asian, and Sikh communities have experienced since September 11th and calls for action to address the lasting impacts of 9/11. I hope this hearing becomes one step of many to examine and ultimately dismantle 9/11-era policies that have perpetuated and exacerbated discrimination against these communities. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. I yield back.